Hey everybody, this is Matt Whitney. We'll get going here in just a few seconds. All right, that looks like it's on. And it should be on too. It is. Good. All right, so we are live. Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Matt Whitney. I'm the creative director for SDI. Thanks for being here for this digital town hall where we're gonna talk about spiritual companionship for our times. I would like to briefly introduce our panelists and of course begin with our host, who is Reverend Seifu, our executive director of SDI. Hi, Reverend Seifu. Moving around my circle, I have Reverend Danny Forbes, who is a pastor in Seattle. Hi, Danny. I have Cynthia Bailey-Mans, who is our chair of the coordinating council. Thank you for being here. Mary DeYoung is an urban naturalist and an eco-spiritualist who runs a website called waymarkers.net. Hi, Mary. And we have Rabbi Ted Falcon, who is one of the Interfaith Amigos. It's good to have you here. And then we have, in and out, we have Imam Jamal Rahman, who is dealing with some audio issues. And so he may be in holding silent space for us. We'll just kind of have to see. But at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Seifu to open up this space together.
Thank you, Matt, and good morning to all of you. Thank you for making time on this Saturday to join us. We're going to begin with just a brief, some brief moments of silence, meditation, an opportunity for all of us to come together as a community through our virtually, but also in other ways, in other important ways. So I'm going to ring this bell, and perhaps we can take 10 deep breaths together and calm, center ourselves, ground ourselves as much as possible, and be mindful of all of the people who are joining us, hopefully across many of the regions and the communities of SDI. So 10 deep breaths, and then I'll ring the bell to get us started. Thank you. That's probably a lot quicker than most of us are used to, but we do want to get started. So I'm going to, the format is going to be the following. I and Rabbi Ted, Mary, Cynthia, and Danny are all going to make some comments, some initial comments to start with. And then the bulk of this 90-minute session will be devoted to a dialogue with all of you who are watching. And Matt will instruct all of you how to ask us questions, and he'll be moderating and triaging those questions. So he will be moderating after all of our comments, unless Matt, you have anything you want to add at this point? No. Okay, well, so I'm Reverend Seifu. I'm the Executive Director of SDI, and I want to, again, thank you all for being here. Our theme for a conference in Santa Fe that was supposed to happen next month, that's now been rescheduled to next year from the 22nd to 25th of April in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is spiritual companionship for our times, spiritual direction for our times. And what greater relevance does our calling and our ministry have than at a time like this, when the world is facing this pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, and everything that it brings. And as I was reflecting on this last night and trying to think about some of the things I might be saying as seeds to stimulate our discussion this morning, it came to me, and it's probably come to many others, that not only do we have a health pandemic, but we have a pandemic of fear. And the fear is a natural response. We all try to, we want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our families. We want to protect our elders and those who are most vulnerable to this kind of crisis. And unfortunately, some of that fear then multiplies far out of proportion. And I think that's part of the dynamic that we're in, is a pandemic of fear, as well as a very real pandemic health crisis, major health crisis, unprecedented actually. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, how that darkness, which is manifesting also in the midst of tremendous acts of compassion and understanding and warmth and support, is actually the ground that spiritual companions and spiritual directors are exploring with those who we companion all the time. This darkness, this doubt, this fear, this loneliness and sense of alienation from the higher purpose in our life, however we refer to that purpose, whether it's God or Tao or Brahman, or I talk about it as the universe. But however you refer to it, from whatever your perspective is, that disconnection and that longing to reconnect, or to remember our connection is probably a better way to say it. To remember our connection is what drives our work, what drives the work of spiritual companions. Death is always knocking at the door. And in some ways, death is knocking at the door more insistently than usual with this pandemic. It's kind of a grim lottery, if you will, and says, I'm coming to get some of you, and I'm coming to get some of you now. And that particular fear is I think what is paradoxically the most fertile ground for spiritual growth, and really the opportunity, the entryway to a deeper communion with however each of us perceives our connection with the infinite, with God, with the divine, again, with however you might refer to the ground of all being. So a lot of this is, it's kind of like the great night of the soul in some ways, is what we're experiencing. And that is the ground from which the beautiful flower of being and growth and communion with our essence that is deeply embedded within us, and that is deeply embedded in every part of the universe, beyond time and space. And so that's really what I'm hoping that we can discuss a little bit this morning. And I do want to give everyone an opportunity, all of the panelists, to bring their own perspectives to this as well. I would say that the final thing I want to say is that the exploration of the unknown and the uncertain, which is what is driving a lot of the fear that we're seeing manifesting in our communities and worldwide, is actually paradoxically, and I am a Zen priest, so you can take this with a grain of salt, but it is actually the most stable ground is the unstable ground, is groundlessness. The deepest form of knowledge is the awareness that we know nothing, that we are creatures of the unknown and the unnameable, and not that we can't deeply connect with that, but it's very hard to speak about it in any way that doesn't reduce it and minimize it. And so this exploration of the unknown is upon us with its corollary, which is the fear and the fear of death specifically that this situation has brought to the forefront for all of us. So with that said, I'm going to ask Rabbi Ted, who is next to me, at least on my screen, to say a few words. And then Matt, I'm going to actually let you take over from here in terms of rotating everybody. So thank you.
Well, I'm assuming that you can hear me now. Reverend Seifu, I'm sure you turned to me because you imagine I have all the answers.
Of course.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I don't. It's, you know, this is a time I feel a tremendous weight. And part of it is the weight of just the tremendous sense of fear and unclarity, trying to find what's real and what's not real. And also wait in terms of WAIT, you know, where one is just waiting to see what happens. I can't think of anything that is more needed at such a time as this than spiritual companioning. And I have a sense that spiritual companioning, as opposed to spiritual direction, is not something that one does. I think spiritual direction is a process that one learns and shares. My own sense of spiritual companioning is less what one does and more of what one is. And so I think we are asked to bring the truth of who we are and how we are in the moment to each other. If we're feeling afraid, to be afraid, and to identify what it is we're afraid of. I personally am not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of the process. But whatever our fear is, to be able to acknowledge it and not try to talk ourselves or talk each other out of it, but to begin with a deep, profound sense of acceptance and a sense of accompanying each other and accompanying ourselves through whatever experience and whatever thoughts and whatever feelings we are having. My experience is that it's resistance, trying to get out of what we are experiencing, what we are feeling, what we are thinking, that keeps us caught in it. So for me, the process begins with a deep sense of acceptance, a sense of integrity, a sense of authenticity, to listen to ourselves, to listen to each other, and to accompany. I am with you, no matter what you're feeling, no matter whether you are consumed with a fear of the moment or not, There's nothing you could feel, there's nothing you could think that would change how I am with you or how we are with each other. Allowing ourselves to move into a space of radical, unconditional acceptance. Because it's from the ground of that acceptance that something blossoms and something blooms. It's from the ground of allowing to be what is that new possibilities emerge. And it's not a one-time thing. It's a constant thing whenever we find ourselves in spaces of difficulty and spaces of stress. At this time, we are asked to separate ourselves from each other, to create social distance. And many of us have decided to shelter in place. And so we need more than ever modes and methods of communication and connection. And I believe that what Spiritual Directors International and Reverend Seifu have chosen this morning is a model for how we can regularly connect with each other, share with each other, be with each other, and discover a natural sense of spiritual companioning, which essentially is spiritual connection, which may be even as profound as a person-to-person meeting. If nothing else, the coronavirus, the COVID-19 that's transcending boundaries of language, of culture, of color, of just is tying the world together and allowing us to see that, in fact, we are all connected. And it is our lack of acting from this deep connection that puts us in great peril as a planet, as people, and as a person. So it's my hope that we will learn from the struggles that we are now going through to share more deeply and more authentically with each other, to step into our own authenticity as spiritual companions, seeing each other as vehicles for the sacred, vehicles for the holy, vehicles for that which transcends the time that each of us share on this planet during this lifetime. I don't have answers. I really wish I did. But I have the encouragement of acceptance, of authenticity, and of congruence, and celebrating spiritual companionship with each other and discovering our own inner spiritual companion, the one always with us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ted. Mary, I'm going to hand the baton over to you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Ted, for those words. And for the invitation, Reverend Seifu, for being together in circle this morning. I too am feeling overwhelm and anxiety and grief as the world that we knew just a couple weeks ago seems to be deconstructing or maybe reconstructing all around us. And I think there's three perspectives or offerings that I would like to share that have been coming to me, particularly in the last week, that I'd like to offer to you all as we, I think, expand our sense of companionship even to the land and to the more than human world and the wild ones who I think offer us some real grounding perspective. speaking into the theme of darkness, I would suggest that our memory is shrouded in darkness, because memory tends to be kept in either current time or very, very recent generational time. And I want to suggest that within darkness is a deep time memory, a memory that is really writ throughout the land. And a practice that I do, and I invite those with whom I companion to do, is to center and ground into their localized homescapes, the ground that upon which they live, and look to the directions as a way of looking to memory, particularly as a way to remember trauma to land and people, as a way to reconnect to resilience. And I think, and this can be hard to hold, but something about how this isn't exceptional to our time. Pandemics have come before. Trauma has come before. And this deep time memory, I think, offers a beauty in that the perspective given shows resilience. So I would say that in this time, in this sacred space that is opened up before us, we might be hearing the earth herself say, remember Indigenous names, uncover the landscape before colonization, learn the native species of plants and trees and animals, and from there, learn the trauma and dispossession of people, plants and animals, and the ground herself. The earth has been reshaped by trauma, by violence. When? Right now in my office, I'm actually facing south. So my south facing has me looking towards Mount Rainier. Tahoma. Tahoma is the Indigenous name of this huge mountain. And the landscape around Mount Rainier, around Tahoma, was formed by profound violence and trauma. There was a lahar, a major earth mudslide that came off of the side of Tahoma and caused tremendous violence and trauma to the land and the valleys beneath. And yet through that, life emerges, continues to emerge. So I think that remembering, going back into kind of the darkness of deep time memory, it can be painful, and it can provide profound memories of resilience and how life emerges through these times. I also want to offer a recovered sense of eco-communion. I love scripture that comes from the Hebrew tradition, the book of Job, chapter 12, verses 7 and 8. That I feel like, again, is an invitation in this time, the sacred time of quieting. Ask the animals, and they will teach you. The birds of the air, and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, and they too will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. What are they saying to us in the context of COVID? What are the birds saying? What are the animals saying? I think that they are inviting us into localized living. So as we shelter in place, as we are at home, we are being invited to look to wildlife that is just beyond our door, to the health and wellness that they proclaim with their bird chirps and their fluttering wings and four-footed ways. Now, in that, we're being called to connect to earth and animal as neighbor as well. So how through this time can we be reinvited to reestablish these relationships with the wild ones as neighbor as well, and have our health, spiritual well-being really be expanded and find new senses of imagination in this time? Those would be my offerings, I think, this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. if the birds in my backyard are any indication, they could not be happier listening to them yesterday. Cynthia, I'm going to hand the baton over to you, my friend.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone. So I too, last night, was thinking about what did I want to share this morning about where we are, where I am. And I'm coming at this from 3 lenses. One, as the adult learning director of a very large Catholic parish in Minneapolis. One, as the coordinator of the spiritual direction formation program at St. Kate's University. And the one that's the most important, because it's grounding everything that I do right now, is a person who's actively being treated for COVID. And so what I have found during this time is what I always tell my students is begin with yourself. So I'm waking up every morning and checking in during the day, asking myself, what am I most afraid of? Right now, what am I most afraid of? And then to take the time to think about that, to give that voice, to let myself feel that in my body. And then to try to say, what's another way to look at this? Because that creates a space for me to sink into that incredible place of freedom of, I don't know, because I don't. And so with that freedom, then it allows me to think of, what do I want to do with this time right now? How do I want to spend this hour? How do I want to make plans? What do I want to think about? What do I want to feel? What do I want to do? How do I want to be? And because of my living circumstances with the 88-year-old mother that lives in the house with us, a daughter who is a teacher's aide at a preschool, Montessori preschool, and a husband who's working at home, and me in self-isolation, that creates a space of really sinking and getting comfortable with, I don't know, and the reality of the recognition that we are all in different places separately, but I am still so connected to everyone, whether it's the people in this house, whether it's the students that I have as we get ready to go to online teaching, and I'm sending things out to them to help them think about their own self-care and soul care. Whether it's my parish of 9,000 members, where I'm doing a daily log of things for them to think about. Where is spirit in this time, particularly of Lent, where we may not even be able to come together to celebrate Easter? And how do they continue to sustain themselves in their soul care when we're such an active parish that's so community and justice focused? So how do we all, as we physically distance ourselves, still remember that we are connected to each other because of spirit, however you define that to be? And that we get because of the I don't know, we get to look at possibilities that we may not have thought of before. So to sink into that freedom and allow ourselves that grace with ourselves and with each other. That's my offering at this point.
Thank you, Cynthia. Danny?
Thank you so much. I'm Danny Forbes. I'm a Presbyterian pastor in Seattle, in a city where everything seems to be changing by the moment. We just learned last night that all of our playgrounds are closed and parks, and we continue to wait for the shelter in place order, though that hasn't happened yet. So all of that to say that we are in a time here of deep uncertainty, and I have 3 children at home, husband working from home, and so our family is very full and trying to sort this out. And the amount of questions that I get just as a mother, why did this happen? Why is this happening? when is this going to be over, are sort of questions that I am navigating on a regular basis. So as I've been thinking about what to bring to this space, I don't feel like I have any sort of expert opinion at all, and I only speak from my own space and my own experience. And the first thing that I continue to come back to is that, and this is something that has been echoed in each of our panelists, but that we are free to bring all that we are into our spiritual companionship, and specifically our spiritual companionship with ourselves, which I think is an important part of what we're all doing right now. Because if we're not able to walk alongside our own being, then we certainly are not going to be able to walk alongside another's. And I've experienced that with my own children. And the question that I keep coming back to is how am I walking alongside my own sense of fear and anxiety and wonder and uncertainty? So I've learned that I need to bring all of that to the table, and not pretend that it's not there. I think that's a temptation that I've had as a spiritual leader, is to say, I'm okay. There's things here that I can understand, that I can make sense of. And I've just had to say that that's not true. I too am a human, and I live in a certain degree of fear about what the future holds. And I accept that. And that space of acceptance of my own fear and anxiety has given me sort of the gateway, the entry point into recognizing that, in fact, there is so much more that is true than our own fear. And once I was able to make space for that fear, to sort of give it a location, not everything, not let it take over, but say that yes, it's here, it's right here in this space, and I can see it, and I know that it's there, I'm not denying it. Then I was able to see and to back up a little bit and to see the rest of the space that exists in and among the fear and anxiety. And that has given me a deep sense of peace, and a sense of being able to accept that there is much in this situation that I just cannot control, and that's okay. It invites me into that space of my own raw humanity, and it invites me to trust that the ground beneath my being is big enough to hold my own raw humanity, which is something that I've claimed for the folks that I've worked with, and it now has to be something that I claim for myself. And in fact, I'm discovering that that is in fact the place where we encounter raw compassion, raw love, raw empathy, and raw growth. And all of those things seem to be sort of happening simultaneously. I'll just say briefly that I'm a part of a community that had been working, had been lifting the veil on conciliatory work with our Native population here in Washington State. We had just gotten this off the ground in the last month, so that is very much on hold. But in our last meeting, where we went out to a reservation here in Washington State to visit with some of the spiritual leaders there, and this was before all of the COVID-19 had really heated up, in our very just authentic conversation, the continual harm of the earth continues to come up in the work that needs to be done in the future. And one of the things that the Native folks said to us, and I don't equate this with COVID-19, but I just put it out there as something to reflect on, is that the earth too offers discipline. And I have been holding that tightly, because I think that there is a certain amount of reflection and hard work that we will all need to do on the other side of this, to try to figure out not how to return to normal, but how to carve a new path that allows us to continue to be fully and authentically ourselves, and ourselves in connection to the earth, in connection to our local spaces, in connection to, like what Mary was saying, all of the beings around us that that are alive, and that maybe do not speak the language that we speak, but if we listen, we can learn their language too. And that might be where we need to be putting our thoughts for the future. So as I wrap up, accepting our own fear and anxiety, but accepting it as a limited part of who we are, and seeing that there's something beyond it that invites us into something that is much deeper and more real. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for your very vulnerable sharing. I guess there's no other way to do it these days. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to kind of call on y'all as we move into this next part of our town hall conversation. I've been scribbling down things that each of you has been saying, and so Cynthia, I'm going to start with you. I wonder if you could respond to Danny's invitation to accept our fear, or the invitation to accept the anxieties and, well, I'll just leave it at that. How do we learn to sit with fear and anxiety?
You know, this is one of the things that, as I'm teaching in the certificate program, we talk a lot about. What are the things as a companion, as a director, that keep us bound in fear and anxiety? What holds us back from being free? And so I think it really requires that, for myself, it requires that I am honest, no matter where that honesty takes me, particularly at this time, to give myself permission to sink into that fear and to honor it, not fight it, not discount it, not beat up on myself because it's there, but to really honor it and let its voice be heard throughout every cell of my body, and then work with it in order to decide how I want to step into that fear and create another way to see it and go through it, not sit in it, but go through it. So we spend a lot of time in class talking about what is it that keeps us bound, and are we willing, no matter how difficult it is? And to be honest, if we're not, there are some minutes when I have no desire to honor that. Even that is freedom, is to allow myself that grace and space. Yet to really not ask our people that we companion, not ask them to do something that we are not willing to do. That's what I'd say, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Reverend Seifu, because this is your ground, is this this fear of death knocking on our door, and that it circles back to that. I wonder, as a Zen priest and practitioner, if you have practical wisdom for sitting with that.
Yes, thank you, Matt, and thank you to all the panelists for your wonderful insights. I have 6 children, and
Say if I'm going to interrupt you because your audio keeps kind of crackling.
Okay.
Okay,
Am
you
I-
sound good. You sound good now, so I'm going to let you continue.
All right. The invitation of fear is to lean in, not to run away. And it's like fear is like a balloon. It can be pricked easily, and this huge obstacle, this seemingly huge obstacle, vanishes in the instant that you lean into it. And so that's why I was saying this pandemic of fear is also a pandemic of opportunity in some way. It's an invitation to really lean into the deeper. We have no choice. We're stuck at home. We're forced to contemplate and reflect. We're living with our worries and anxieties every moment these days. And so why not embrace that opportunity to become friends with our fears, to become friends with our maybe despair is too strong of a word, but with our anxiety. And by embracing it, it vanishes. I mean, I think that's the experience that I have had, and that I know many of the people that I companion have similarly had, is that once you embrace what you fear, it turns out to be a big nothing burger. In some ways, and actually it's kind of like a rite of passage, and we all have that rite of passage awaiting us, right? And it's our own deaths and the limitations of the physicality of these bodies that we inhabit so temporarily, in favor of a deeper essence and a deeper communion, which is with us always, and will always be. These quotes in the Bhagavad Gita of being across all time and space. I am the one who was and is and will be, and that's all of us at any time. And so I think that's the invitation that I see here, is to lean in, embrace, and become friends with our fear and dissipate it that way.
So to take that negative emotion, that fear or anxiety, and befriend it.
Yeah.
Rabbi Ted, I wonder if you could speak to that. Do you have any wisdom on befriending fear and anxiety, and maybe the ephemerality of our physical bodies?
Well, I could say I've had a lot of practice. The challenge is to be able to open to a deep acceptance and to become aware of the place from which we open to that acceptance. When I become aware of my anxiety and my fear, it may be at the beginning my anxiety and fear has me. And that is all I experience, all I know. But as I examine it, as I allow it to be, as I say to myself, write to myself, or have a companion say to me, I hear you. I know you're afraid. It's okay. Whatever you're feeling is okay. I don't need you to feel anything other than what you're feeling. The space from which that message is coming, whether it's coming from inside myself or whether it is coming from another, is a space where I am no longer owned by my fear. I have my fear, but I'm more than my fear. And my experience is that honoring that space of acceptance, where I am my own companion, I'm saying, I'm with you. I'm not going to leave you. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to try to get rid of. There's no way that you have to be or think or feel. I'm here with whatever you're feeling. I'm here with whatever you're thinking. And I'm here with love. I'm here with acceptance. And I'm with you. And I'm with you always. And maybe I'm writing this to myself, or maybe I'm telling this to a companion, or maybe I'm hearing this from a companion. And something starts happening. And it's not actually, I'm not sure it chases the fear away. It just starts allowing me to be bigger than the fear, allows me to be more than the fear. The ego, as far as I can tell, is always frightened of its vulnerability and of its fragility. To try to get the ego to do otherwise is, from my point of view, a waste of time, because that's the ego's function, to try to keep me safe in the world, to manage my biological, my individual body in the material world. But the real pain comes when I forget that that's not all of who I am, that there is behind that separate sense of self, the one who has the separate sense of self. And behind that is the one who knows that it has the separate sense of self. And my experience is there are unlimited levels of transcendence. And whenever I think I've transcended everything, I know I'm stuck. That there's always more. And in a lot of ways, the essence of a response to the one or the part of me that's captured in fear is to say yes, and yes, and yes, and there's always more. There's always more.
Thank you. Mary, I want to come to you, and it's something that pinged when Danny was sharing, which is spiritual companionship for little humans. What are ways of being with our kids right now? I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. Yeah, so like Danny, I have little ones at home too. I have 4 children who I am also being with, and they're learning how to be in this time. And I think that it's always helpful for me to remember that I am not so different than the little ones, that I am a child too in so many ways. And so often what I would direct them to do, it's the deepest medicine for myself as well. And so, and in fact, it kind of gets at this conversation around fear, because they are holding a lot of it. And they might not be as well versed in speaking to it and naming it eloquently, but their bodies show it. And so what we are working with as a family, and this also is what I would bring to those who I accompany when fear and anxiety are present. Yes, it's absolutely acknowledging it, befriending it, bringing it in. And then it's the metabolizing of it, because cortisol doesn't do really good things for our body. So what are practices that we can do to meet and greet and be with, and then get it out of our system every 24 hours. So for us, it returns to the health and wellness that is available in such tremendous access in the natural world, getting outside and doing it in ways that are still absolutely honoring to the realities of our time. Keeping social distance is really practical, and we can do it really well when we are beyond confined spaces. So we have been going out to our local green space and touching trees. I mean, really getting sensory connection, which is a way to metabolize our feelings. Even doing big body hugs with trees, like getting as much of our skin contact as we can on that surface, running through the trails, climbing the trees, yesterday, even we had a session with our family where we found a cedar tree. We sat beneath her boughs. My sons collected some native flora and fauna to create forest tea. Again, this is a practice of being with and being out, practicing an act of permission and gratitude with the land. And then we sat underneath the cedar tree and we read poetry to each other and we drank forest tea. In that real simple act, I think a lot of profound things are happening. Again, there's that connection to land, that connection to where we are located, the seeing of all these springtime forms that are blooming and flourishing. Noticing that aspect of our season alone, I think, is a profound gift right now. That even through the darkness of winter, through the darkness of seasons, new life will emerge and provide medicine and nourishment. And we can take that in and return to simple practices of storytelling, poetry, backs against trees. You know, again, that stable presence of something other than ourselves is a real practical way of getting that fear moving through the body. So maybe that's some practical help.
It's very practical. I want to go run out and hug a tree right now. It's like, we can't hug one another. I go hug something else. What's nearby?
Absolutely.
Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a ton of questions here, and we have over 400 participants in this space, and I want to get to as many of these as possible. So I'm going to kind of move to a Q&A session, and I will steer questions to y'all individually, but I imagine there will be many of us who will want to respond. I'm going to begin with an anonymous attendee who asks, and I'm going to steer this towards Cynthia because I know that you teach spiritual direction. As faculty in a spiritual direction training program, what advice do you think we should highlight for students, especially new ones, who are now meeting virtually with directees?
So one of the things I also talk about a lot is preparing yourself before you go into a session. So taking the time to really do a check-in with yourself. How am I feeling spiritually? How am I feeling physically? What do I need to set aside before I go into that session? And to probably at this time give yourself extra time to do that, so that you can really be grounded and feel like you have the capacity and space to give to another person. Because we take all of who we are into that session. And to really be aware of when something comes up that you know you need to attend to be able to set it aside so you can be present to that person and to spirit. And then to honor that when you're done with that session and go back and attend to it, to help yourself all along the way be free, not to be bound, so that you can be present to the person you're with. So to really spend extra time preparing yourself to be present to that person and the sacred. And whatever is the best way for you to do that, to make sure you do more of it.
Cynthia, I have another question for you, and it's because I know we've talked about this, you and I, before. Anonymous attendee asks, is it recommended that we contact our guidees or seekers between monthly meetings to make ourselves available in the events they wish to meet in the interim?
So part of my answer to that would be piggybacking off of what I just said. Are you able to do that? At this point right now, I am not sitting with my directees. I am asking them to sit with someone else because it's taking all that I have to deal with what I'm dealing with, and to I don't want to stop teaching, so I want to be able to do that, and I cannot give all that I need to do to my people that I sit with in a way that honors them and in a way that is the best for them. And one of my first rules is always do no harm. So I think it's really important. And that's the way I framed it with people that I sit with, and mainly I sit with clergy. And I know that's hard because they are a group of people who are the most affected by what's going on, not being able to be present to their congregations in large groups. So what I've tried to do is to connect them with other companions, directors, who can sit with them during this time. And I've been able to do that with everybody. And that's the best I can do right now. And because I don't want to create harm, that's what's most important, that I think is honoring them and myself at this point. I think I answered that, but did I answer it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think the natural inclination for spiritual companions is to just want to give and be present
Right.
to as many people as possible. That is the gifting of spiritual companionship. And
Yes.
We can draw on that well for so long, but if we don't fill that well and practice self-care and go back into our contemplative practices, then we may run empty pretty quickly. Right. Yeah, thank you. A lot of questions about offering remote spiritual guidance during this time. Stella De Venuta asks that we address this, whether it's through FaceTime, Zoom, WhatsApp, or whatever, and that some folks don't find it acceptable or appropriate. She writes, I believe we need to be doing this to offer presence. Would appreciate any thoughts on this or any concerns. In particular, suggestions for making a remote session a strong sacred space versus a conversation. And I think many of us have thoughts on this, but Danny, I wanted to have you maybe share about this, because I know that you have moved your congregation to virtual gatherings, and maybe you could speak to how that's been going for you so far.
In terms of spiritual care without a place, is that sort of what you're asking? Just
or in a virtual place.
In a virtual place, right? Yeah. Well, we're figuring it out as we go. We are trying. We've been recording our church services, or at least the elements of our service, and posting that online. I'll just speak very practically for a second. We are very aware of the challenges across demographics when it comes to technology. And we've been trying to be as equitable as possible, knowing that not everybody has access to technology. And so I have been working to both do mailings and also to provide resources online. And then this Sunday, we're going to be trying some similar to this, a webinar as a church service, just to see how that goes. It has been really essential to try to figure out how to keep people together and to keep them connected. And so we've had to enlist multiple ways of communication. I've even just gone, and this last week, literally just made my way down the church directory and did phone calls to each person to check in about how things are going and what folks might need. So we have sort of stepped into a multi-pronged approach, which is probably not sustainable for maybe other communities, but it's been the way that we've had to do it. I will say that phone calls have been really positive. I think that venues like this are great because they can capture a whole host of people, but phone calls have given an opportunity for me to just hear people's mundane thoughts and sort of really ordinary feelings, which I think has put us in touch with one another a little bit more. And so I'll just put that out there that phone calls have been surprisingly one of the ways in which we've achieved the most connection.
Can I just jump in for a second on that too?
Of course.
one of the things I'm going to start doing is, as the adult learning director for my parish, is there's so much incredible writing going on and information sharing. So we have a Facebook page, and so I'm going to start sending that information to our tech person, who's going to start posting a lot of that stuff and also putting it on our website. And then hoping that there will be Facebook groups that get together within our congregation to discuss different things. So that's one of the ways we're going to try to keep people in connection with each other through some of the technological things that we have to work with right now.
Thank you so much. Rabbi Ted, I would love to hear how you are companioning people during this time. One of the things that you said in regards to shelter in place is that we need multiple modes of communication, and certainly we're leaning on the virtual tools that we have and are kind of improvising as we go. I wonder if you could speak to that, or if anything springs forth that we haven't thought of yet, and maybe if anyone else has anything really exciting to say about that, feel free. But Rabbi Ted, I would love to hear from you.
It's interesting, Matt. As of several weeks ago, I've switched all my meetings with my clients onto Zoom. I already was meeting with many because I really am blessed by seeing people who are not in the same city as I. I've had the interesting experience of sometimes experiencing not only as deep a connection, but sometimes even a deeper connection than a person to person. And I know this is, this may not be a common experience, but we're actually talking about a universal consciousness. We're talking about something that, I mean, it's not something even, we're talking about a universal awareness, a universal consciousness, which channels through each and every one of us. And that consciousness is actually not contained in any particular or restricted to any particular physical location. It is universal. And to recognize it and to fall into it when there is a physical distance can sometimes be incredibly reassuring. That allows us to transcend the apparent sense limits. You know, because a lot of times we're dealing with each other with our senses, and our senses are brought to our individual physical systems, sight, touch, physical touch, smell, taste. And what we strive to do in spiritual awareness, greater presencing, is to step behind that sensory data and honor a kind of shared life, a kind of shared being, a kind of shared presence, a kind of that connects us in many ways more intimately than we can ever achieve through our senses. It is kind of odd, but I'm convinced there are gifts in what we are encouraged to do now. There are gifts in decreasing the frequency of jet flights, which have been contributing radically to the environmental degradation. There's a gift of not driving as much. There's a gift of a decrease of the getting and spending and going. There is a gift to being drawn, invited to reconnect with what we experience as really the most important aspects of our lives. It is weird that the people who are most important to us are often the people we spend the least time with, because we're away at work and we come home and we got the busyness of making a meal, or, you know, and this is really challenging us to live into our deepest priorities and to revisit and re-meet those people with whom we live, who are, at least in language, our primary partners and our primary people. I don't see this as making everything okay. I just see this as gifts that the radical sheltering in place, the radical separation, which is now required to keep this virus from just replicating endlessly, in fact, can offer us the opportunity of awakening together to a deeper shared reality, a deeper shared love, a deeper shared presence. And I just feel blessed by that.
Matt, I just want to jump in on this as well. Thank you, Rabbi Ted, and thank you all again. I've been scribbling a few notes as I've been navigating the questions as well. And I think this is just a few thoughts here. This is a wonderful opportunity for intimacy. It's really kind of paradoxical in a way that we are being asked to socially distance and to physically remove ourselves from the greater congregation, if you will, of people. And yet, it's also an opportunity to build intimacy with our fears, intimacy with ourselves, intimacy with all sorts of things. You know, we are not alone. You are not alone, even if you're stuck at home. Someone was asking a question and making a statement in the chat line that I'm going to translate as stillness speaks, right? That this is an opportunity for us to listen to silence, to listen to the wind and look at the sun and embrace all sorts of different types of communication that are always open to us that we're not hearing because we're so busy with our lives and our routines and our cars and our supermarkets and our jobs and certificates and diplomas and all sorts of things that occupy us, and bank accounts, and not listening to what's often called that still voice within, or the still voice out there. So it's really an opportunity for intimacy in so many ways, by listening across all channels. Also, what is, you know, the notion of home? What does home mean really? Is it just a box that we occupy with our partners and our loved ones, our family, our friends, or however we live? Or is it something more? What is home? Isn't home our heart, our being, our presence as well? And so this pandemic, this health pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, but also this pandemic of fear, is also an invitation to listen more deeply, listen more carefully, to rethink some of our values and our priorities, and, you know, where is home, and who are we really, not just in this temporality, but across a larger expanse of time and space. So.
Yeah, thank you. There's a real invitation to unknowing, I think, and the way Rabbi Ted put it, the word that came to me was faith. It's just practicing faith. So many good questions here. I just want to thank everybody who is participating in the chat and sharing feedback. The chat is also an excellent place to find wisdom from participants here. Make sure you read through all of it. It's so rich and beautiful. This is a really important question I want to get to from Deb Goldman, and I'll just open it up. As spiritual companions, some sheltering in place, how do we continue to uphold those who are most impacted by this virus disproportionately due to already existing social justice issues? How can we continue to be part of the healing of this injustice?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matt. You know, what is ours to do, right? And for those of us who are fortunate enough to have boxes that we own, quote unquote, or that we live in, and reliable income streams, and the comfort of partners and family. You know, as I look around and see so many people, millions of people in the US and around, and so many hundreds of millions around the world who are being, who's already very tenuous economic and more than that existence was being challenged on a daily basis, how much worse they have it now and how much worse they're going to have it in the weeks and months to come and probably years to come. What can we do? And, you know, I can only answer for myself here, although it would be great to hear everyone else's thoughts on this panel. But we're also fortunate in that we are spiritual companions and we are spiritual directors. And so what we're called to do is things like this town hall and the webinars and writing and teaching and sharing and communing with people by phone or Zoom or in person, even if from 6 feet apart, 2 meters apart, is to be there and to listen. I mean, really, it's the core of our practice as spiritual companions is deep listening, and so that's that. There's always an opportunity to do that very actively. And that's just my take, but it'd be great if the other panelists could jump in as well.
Danny, you
I'll
look
jump
like,
in now,
yeah,
if that's okay.
of course.
Can you hear me? Because I changed my,
Yes.
Okay, thank you. At our congregation, we have a homeless shelter that meets there. And I will say navigating that part of my work has been challenging and also really good during this time. The needs are increasing in terms of folks needing a respite placed during the day. And that has created a challenge for our facility because we're located right in the middle of a neighborhood. And so I want to echo what Reverend Seifu said in terms of the work that we can do as spiritual companions and directors is to continue to offer this work of developing and holding and making space for the spirit, because the biggest challenge that I face as a local pastor is the reality that most of the people, or at least a great deal of the folks in my neighborhood, do not want homeless people living in proximity to them. And that is a great part of my work, and also a great burden that I carry as I try to make space for these folks within our community. And this, I think, speaks to more of the illumination of the pandemic of fear that has been growing. We have not just been afraid of this virus for the last year or two. We have been deeply afraid of other human beings around us and their ability to live quite peacefully in proximity to us. And we have shut others out. And the only way that I believe that it's possible to help to change that for the future is to engage in more spiritual companionship and direction, and to help people see that life is more than the box, that life is more than the transactional work that we do. And in fact, we all need each other in order to be human on this planet.
Thank you. Maybe I'll shift to another question. Brenda Bertrand asks, what does ministry not look like to those experiencing pain? Are there topics or things to stay clear of during this time?
I'll jump in while the others think about their responses. Matt, I can't think of, what would be off limits. I think every thread, is universal, right? Whatever we pull on brings everything else along with it. And so I can't really think of what I might consider an off limits topic at a time like this, because no matter how seemingly random the approach or the question or the concern or anxiety that's being raised, it's pregnant. It's always full of with everything else, with the entire universe, actually, in some ways. And so my answer, although people may have different perspectives on it, is no question is off limits.
And I think this is the space, one of the spaces where, we always talk about how our responsibility as sitting with someone is to allow them to be gracious enough, remember it's about them, and to not have our own agenda when we go in. So allow them, create the space for them to identify what's the heaviest thing on their heart, what is weighing on their mind and their soul, and to be that container that holds that sacred space for them, no matter what it is that comes to us through their words and their actions, because it is about them. So how do we convey to them that no matter what they bring to us, this is the space where it is honored?
Do any of you have suggestions for spiritual companions who are sitting with people who might be dealing with some darkness? Some composting is the language that Reverend Safer and I have been using around here. There was a question about how someone who might not be prepared for people's fear, anxiety, emotions, tears, anger, frustration. Do you have any practical advice as spiritual companions for sitting with people going through those types of things? Or how to hold that space, I should say.
I might offer some of the practices that I bring to others, and it's more of, I guess, a sense of expanding maybe the traditional dyad relationship, the sense that I am in conversation, I am in communion, I am in relationship with the one I am accompanying, but broadening it to also include the more than human world. So not to overemphasize or continue to bring it back outside. And there is this incredible sense that when our companionship relationships are brought to include the trees, the birds, the wind, those feelings of overwhelm, those feelings of this is too much, I might not be able to handle this, both as the one companioning or the one who's being companioned. The context of the natural world is an incredible holder of that. And so practically, I can invite maybe through a seated question or some sort of meditation or just time, held space for the one that I'm sitting with to go outside. Bring that overwhelm, that those huge emotions that feel like they could rupture the space. Sit with those emotions, with the elements, and be willing to, it's a matter of being playful to a degree. Like, can we play here? Can we bring ourselves here? Can we give a sense of personhood to the natural world, and voice to speak in? Because my experience has been repeatedly that what I might feel inadequate to offer, or these feelings that feel so big, get held and met in profound ways, beyond the container of an office space or an indoor space, an interior scape. And so that would be a suggestion.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is breath work. Literally, that is what's sustaining me right now, is my inhaler and breath treatments every 3 to 4 hours. But to sit like we did when we started as a group for this call, in doing deep breath work, which allows every system in your body to slow down, which allows you to be connected to yourself. And what I usually do when I am sitting with directees and we start with breath work is, on that exhale, is to say, I'm here now. I am present right now here. And that's the space from which we begin. And that's life-giving. That creates a space for us to give light to that anxiety, that fear, those intense emotions, that deep breath work, and being present now.
I'd like to add something. I think since so many of us are sheltering in place, and often with a family, I think we're being called upon to focus on some spiritual practices with the family, and perhaps paying more attention to rituals that can help us appreciate the closeness, and also appreciate the challenges and the stresses that closeness brings. Some of us are actually not going outside, just because there are more people wandering around now than there ever have been in many of our neighborhoods, because they're not at work. So for those of us who are inside with other people, we're in a situation that we're not used to. People aren't going out to work and just coming back for meals and stuff. And I think it calls on us to, okay, in what form can meditation be a ritual that we practice as a family, or as with a partner? How do we remind ourselves of the incredible gifts that these moments, these days, these months can bring? So it's in our self-care is also our care for the specific environment in which we're living, and perhaps bringing some of our individual spiritual practices into community, and looking at how expressive storytelling, poetry reading can help us remember, as with our partners, with our families, and take seriously the opportunities for a deeper spiritual connection right where we live.
Yeah, thank you. I'm paying attention to the time, and we may run a few minutes over, and that's just what will happen. I just, again, want to encourage everybody to pay attention to the chat as well, because there's a rich dialogue happening there now. I want to make sure we get to this question. It's a good one. Are you able to talk with your seekers about this virus as a gift, as part of the divine and the natural biosphere? And if so, how do we do that? That's a question from Alan. Thank you.
Absolutely. one of the things that I've been thinking about is the sacredness of waiting and how we think of waiting in so many ways as passive. Waiting is not passive, waiting is active. We are participating in waiting. We are part of waiting. We get a choice to determine how we spend our time in that liminal space. So what are the gifts in COVID-19 for me? The ability to see what is the greater picture, what is how we are all connected even when we are not physically in the same space, how we have the ability to reach down deeper to find something within ourselves that we didn't think was there, but we're able to find it and pull it out, if not for ourselves, for others. That's a gift. And it may show up now because of the space that we're all in together. And that we remember we all are in this together. I am dependent on the people in this house. I'm dependent on the medicine I have and the people who have created that for me. I'm dependent on the person who bagged my groceries and my husband was able to go pick up. I'm dependent on the people in my parish who are praying for me. We are all connected, and this is an opportunity for us to be mindful of that connection and to be creative about the ways that we manifest that in ourselves and connect to each other during this time. That's a gift.
Yeah, I want to echo, and I think, Matt, we're moving to wrapping up here pretty quickly. But I think the coronavirus and the circumstances is imposing on us is an invitation. It's a reminder and an invitation. It's a reminder of the limits of our certainties, if you will, the illusion of certainty that we try to impose on our lives, the structure that we think gives us constant comfort, daily comfort, and that negates or attempts to negate our frailty and our fragilities and our vulnerabilities is exposed. And that exposure is a good thing because it reveals the world and our place in it as it actually is rather than as we would like it to be. And those are, so that is a tremendous gift. And of course it comes wrapped it comes wrapped with a warning. I won't even call it a threat. It comes wrapped with a warning and a reminder that we are kind of these beings navigating through a universe that is not only infinite, that is infinitely expanding. There's a notion that I can understand.
Saif, I'm gonna, can you pause for just a second and see if your audio started crackling again?
Okay.
Okay, it's better.
So the notion of an expanding universe, which I can understand theologically, and that science is revealing as well, is an invitation to really, is a reminder of our little places in the grander scheme of things. And so I think this coronavirus pandemic is an invitation in many ways.
Yeah. And in regards to that invitation, we're running out of time here, and I just wanted to thank everybody for participating and for holding this space, all of our 400 plus participants, to our panelists. Thank you for your time. I want to let people know that this portal that we have created, this sdicompanions.online, we're hoping to host several town halls like this over the coming weeks. Our next one will be Friday, I believe, with Reverend Seifu and Cynthia, Ravi Verma, and Karen Ehrlichman. And Reverend Seifu and I are working to have other types of offerings here as well, including spiritual practices. Someone asked about, there was a question about yoga and movement, and those are the kinds of things that we would love to offer here. So we will keep you posted on those offerings as they're scheduled. Keep Friday on your calendar. I don't have the exact time in front of me. Sometime in the morning, Pacific time, 8 or 9, that's March 27th. And I would like to close just by asking each of you panelists in 15 to 20 seconds, what is one practical tip or offering that you could offer people to do during this time, whether it's a spiritual practice of your own? Cynthia, you talked about the breath. And I'll let each of you offer in turn. Let's begin with Rabbi Ted.
I would say don't just do something, sit there. You know, I would say sit with the breath, sit with whatever's going on. Do whatever you can to find that voice inside you that says, I am here with you, I will stay with you. Whatever you're feeling is absolutely okay. I don't need you to feel anything other than that. I love you. I am here with you always.
Thank you. Mary?
I would want to suggest reading The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry on repeat. If you don't know his poems, he is such a rich resource, and The Peace of Wild Things in particular. So I can maybe even share that in the chat. Yeah, find the wild things wherever they are, even if that's planting an herb garden in your windowsill in your kitchen, finding ways to connect with these other forms of life to remind us of a broader interconnection, that we are a broader web of which we are a part.
Mary, I forgot, someone asked if you could offer the Job passage that you shared earlier. If you could just type that into the chat.
I can do it.
The particular passage. Yes, thank you. Reverend Seifu.
Yeah, thanks. So my suggestion is simple. It's be still and listen. Be still and listen. And if you are still and you listen, you will hear. And there's all sorts of things that are going on at all times. And this is a particularly good time to listen in much more deeply.
Great. Cynthia?
So the first one would be breath, to focus on your breath. I'm here now. And then the second one I'm trying to do so much more of is to be acutely aware of all the things that I have to be grateful for.
Thank you. Danny?
Two practices that are important to me, and I feel so grateful that this is the time of spring, because I typically plant a garden every year, and so I'm watching the seeds erupt, and just watching that growth has been a huge sign of life and peace for me. But I think it can extend larger than that, and you can tap into any sort of creation. My daughter has been making cakes, and that has been a great sense of peace for her. So finding that part within us that desires to make something, to be a part of the nourishing of what it means to be human, and letting that be and letting it explore can be a nice way to process through all of the things that come up.
Do all 5 of those things and you will be well. So thank you so much to everybody for being here. Thank you to our panelists. A quick reminder, we are recording this and it will be available on YouTube shortly. So if you caught half of it or a piece of it or want to see it again, it will all be on SDI World's YouTube channel. Much more to come from us in regards to these offerings and in helping to nourish your work. I just, from the bottom of my heart, feel like spiritual companionship is so urgent right now. And the work that each of you is doing is so needed in the world. And so everybody needs you. And we are here to companion with you and to help you and to work through this time together. So blessings to everybody. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone.